Hello, welcome to the interview here on France 24. Is democracy being slowly dismantled piece by piece in the very heart of the European Union? Now, that might sound a little dramatic, but that's exactly what a growing chorus of critics, both at home and abroad, are saying is happening in Hungary under Prime Minister Viktor Orbán and his Fidesz party. The opposition says Orbán has basically taken advantage of a two-thirds supermajority in his parliament to consolidate his power and trample on basic rights. And specifically, they're very angry about Hungary's new constitution, which they say has tightened the government's grip on everything from the judiciary to the media. Now, my guest today, Balázs Denis, joins me from Budapest, and he is the executive director of the Hungarian Civil Liberties Union. It's a non-governmental group. Welcome to France 24.
Bonjour.
I would just like to cut to the chase right here. Your organization is far from convinced that the government of Viktor Orbán in Hungary is being democratic. And the European Union, you know, we saw this years ago when in Austria, Jörg Haider entered the government. He was a far-right figure, and sanctions were passed against Austria. Now, Orbán isn't of the far right, he's the center-right. But some say he could be just as dangerous ultimately. Do you agree with that?
I do agree. You know, I'm not a European analyst, so it's pretty hard to judge what Orbán does, how it will affect the European Union. What I do know is that Mr. Orbán and his government in the last 1.5 years systematically destroyed some important rule of law elements and systematically attacked democratic institutions. This is a fact.
Well, should the European Union, I mean, like I said, this isn't just Hungarians who are worried about these trends. It's the U.S., Europe. Should they be doing more about it? Should there be sanctions passed against Hungary to sort of raise the alarm?
Well, I think right now what is happening, the European Union and its institutions are doing what they should do. Hungarian citizens, Hungarian watchdog organizations and part of the human rights community, we were terribly disappointed by the silence of the EU and by European institutions in the past months. What is happening now, I think, is a good thing. As a Hungarian citizen, I'm really worried what will happen. As a EU citizen, I'm actually happy that the EU is doing its task, and it task nothing else that if someone within the Union, if a member state or a government is exceeding some limits, then it's important that the EU institutions would raise a voice. And this is what's happening now. And I think it's a good thing.
What is I mean, there's a lot of different measures we could talk about here in the Constitution, outside the Constitution. What for you is the most worrying? I mean, I'm looking at the media law in particular. Some people say there's no more freedom of the press in Hungary. Is that being too dramatic?
Well, too dramatic and not that dramatic. I mean, honestly speaking, the problems with the freedom of the press and the problems with the independent media, or honestly the lack of it, hasn't started with the Orbán government. As someone who is watching the news, as someone who is dealing with the freedom of expression issues, I mean, we were aware that there are problems on this field. But it's pretty clear that the intervention of the Orbán government and the media laws, the infamous media laws, brought a new tone to this issue. It's pretty okay. It's not an exaggeration to say that the media laws in Hungary right now are endangering freedom of speech and meaning a daily problem for everyone who would like to get information from the news, for example.
Can you criticize the government of Viktor Orbán on any television or radio channel right now in Hungary?
You can, but your task is rather challenging these days. It's probably a bit particular, but it's important. The only opposition type of talk radio, Radio Club or Club Radio, the frequency of it was just taken away by the National Telecommunications Authority.
It's just shut down.
There is one. Yeah, just said, still operating, still broadcasting and going to court, but basically the verdict was already done. The verdict was brought, and it seems that they won't be able to broadcast on a national frequency or on a Budapest frequency. In TV channels, yes, there is one TV channel which still could be considered as an opposition TV channel, but all the rest are either very prudent or very cautious or very pro-government. There is one example which probably tells you and to the viewers what is happening in Hungary. And it's an example from 2010. 2010 was the year when they introduced the media laws. And we are talking about 10th of December 2010. That's International Human Rights Day. And I'm usually asked, as a human rights expert by the media, what do I think about the state of human rights in the country? And then on that day, 2010 December, I was asked about important issues. And I'm starting to list the question of the Roma and the questions of free speech, the media law, and then they stop me and they say, Mr. Dénes, you know we cannot broadcast this. And I say, how do you mean you cannot broadcast this? And they say, well, you know the situation is pretty tricky. And this is public service media, International Human Rights Day.
Yeah. That's censorship in a sense. It's a type of censorship.
This is
No, I was just making the point. It's a type of censorship, and the media law is just one aspect. I also wanted you to address the judiciary. Some people say that Orban using his position to appoint people to powerful posts, public prosecutor for one, judges are being ousted from the bench. Where do you stand on that?
Well, it would be hardly seen on a different way. There is one profession in Hungary of which the pension age is currently written into the new constitution, and those are judges serving on the bench. So the only potential reason why it was important for the government party to write down the pension age of judges into the new constitution was actually because in this way they kind of able to prevent that anyone would file a constitutional court complaint because of the fact that the government majority reduced from 70 to 62 the age when judges must leave court.
But some people, I'm sorry to break in, but some people say he's using that as a pretext to appoint only party loyalists, only people who are loyal to the Fidesz party.
I think it's not an exaggeration to say that. The fact that they removed the head of the Supreme Court, the president of the Supreme Court was basically fired just because the institution was renamed to Courier. So instead of Supreme Court, we have now a Courier. The fact that they fired out the former president of the court, who is actually serving as the president of the Association of European Supreme Court Presidents, is definitely something very problematic. The fact that they appointed a new person to the National Court Administrator Office, the fact that they appointed a former Fidesz MP to the Chief Prosecutor's Office, the fact that the Media Council, which is probably the most important of all the institutions around this problematic media landscape, contains only Fidesz or government party delegates, is rather problematic.
Balázs Dénes, I want to ask you, though, now Orban's party, Fidesz, they sit in the European Parliament with the EPP, the European Popular Party, or European People's Party. The EPP has said, let's not over-dramatize here. This new constitution, we used to have a Stalinist constitution in Hungary. This is a lot better than that. So let's not blow this out of proportion. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think one thing is important to note, that the fact that the People's Party last week issued a statement in which they called Orban's attention to respect European values is a very important message. Because 1 year ago, when we were criticizing the government and asking the European Parliament's help about the media law, the People's Party was totally silent and they kind of closed their lines behind Orban. Now it's a different situation. So if we have an ear for that, that's important to note. Secondly, the mild parts of the statement about the former Stalinist constitution, these are not true. Hungary did have a new constitution after '89. I mean, it might was called with the same numbers as the old constitution.
But it was basically
different. It was totally different. It was modified at least 300 times. You know, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that, except the line that Hungary's capital is Budapest, everything else was changed from that Stalinistic constitution.
Balázs Denis, we have a little bit of time left. We saw a big rally right after the New Year when the new constitution came into effect. Tens of thousands of Hungarians protesting. How strong, how solid is the opposition to Viktor Orban? And what about outside the big cities like Budapest?
It's very hard to tell. I mean, this demonstration was probably the first sign of some kind of union between the opposition parties, and it's an important step. You know, what does this mean for the future? What kind of collaboration and cooperation could grow out of it? It's a question at this point. But the important thing is to note, and this is critical to tell it everywhere, why tens of thousands were demonstrating on the street, the national TV, the public broadcast TV, and this is something which runs from taxpayers' money, actually show empty streets. So this is where we are now. It's not self-censorship anymore, it's direct censorship in the media.
Finally, very briefly, last question. Part of the reason Viktor Orban came to power is because people were fed up with the predecessors, the socialists. Is there any alternative right now? Is there an opposition that really is ready to take power?
Right now, I don't think that's the case. Right now, the situation is rather discouraging because from one hand, we have Orban with all these anti-democratic and anti-rule of law measures. And then we have an opposition which partly consists parties which totally lost credibility because of bad governance between 2002 and 2010. We have a small, new, emerging eco-party in the parliament. You know, we don't really know what's the power. And we have a very strong radical right party. Some call that party a neo-Nazi type of party. Yes, it's a Jobbik party. Some call them almost fascist. Their agenda is very often based on anti-Roma or anti-Semitic elements. And they are the only party which could actually gain power in the past months.
Balázs Denis, I'm sorry to cut you off. We're going to have to end you on a very somber note there, talking about the Jobbik far-right party and leaving a big question mark over where is Hungarian democracy going. Balázs Denis, Executive Director of the Hungarian Civil Liberties Union, thank you very much for being my guest today from Budapest.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to all of you for watching the interview here on France 24.